Good morning, everyone. It is the 25th of April, 2021. This is our Sunday morning Bible class in the I Ams of Jesus. And we're going to be looking at the second one of these this morning, and that's in John chapter 8. And in this chapter, it begins with Jesus going to Jerusalem. He rescues the woman taken in adultery from what is certain to be a gruesome fate, and after this he speaks to the disciples. Okay, and so he says in verse 12, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. And the Pharisees immediately oppose him as usual, by saying that his testimony is not true, and Jesus says that it is, and then describes himself somewhat to the religious experts who were there questioning him. All right, so he says here that he is the light of the world. Now, the term light. Let me back up. I am, as we mentioned last week, I am is this way of saying, or way of Jesus connecting back to Exodus chapter 3 in the Old Testament, right? Because we talked about the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, that was made, well over 2,000 years ago. And in Exodus chapter 3, in this incredible chapter where God reveals himself, he says to Moses, when he asks, who shall I say sent me? He said, tell him, I am has sent me to you. And it's kind of tough to figure out in what exactly the message is there, because the term, or the verb, rather, in Hebrew, I am, or I will be what I will be, or I am who I am. It's a little difficult to translate, but essentially it's the basis of God's covenant name, Yahweh, and so it's his power name, his covenant name, the one that was so sacred that Jews refused to speak it, right? And so, and even today, Jews today will refuse to speak it. I do use the term Yahweh from time to time in classes and sermons and in writing. A very observant Jew would probably be pretty upset with me for doing that, because that's just not what you do with the holy name, right? You don't speak it, and even today, Jews will. Very Orthodox Jews, instead of writing God's name, they'll only write the consonants. And so, instead of writing G-O-D, they will write G-D, as a way of showing respect to God's name. I'll be honest with you, I respect that quite a bit, because people in our society today have a way of taking God's name at the drop of a hat. So that is, even though it's something that I don't do and it's a custom that I don't practice, good night. It is refreshing to see somebody, having some respect for God's name. Well, all of this is connected to that name when Jesus says, I am. So I am, statement of divinity, the light of the world. Okay, and so the term light also is extremely important when you look at John's writings. Okay, so you look at John's gospel, you look at his epistles, and even in the book of Revelation some. The light and dark are very, very important ideas. Now, along with life and truth, this is an extremely important idea. And we see it in a variety of places, of course, but between life, truth, and light, it seems like light is the most visually, so it sort of captures us, right? because we can visualize the difference between light and darkness, and that's an important contrast. Light is something that reveals, darkness is something that conceals. Where are most crimes committed? They're committed under the cover of night, or where people cannot observe them, right? And we normally think of people who do commit crimes in broad daylight or where other people can see them. We consider those to be especially heinous, because or it shows that the one committing them is especially brazen, right? Because you've got somebody who does something in broad daylight. They don't have the good sense that most people would have, that something like that is not appropriate, especially for common observation. And so that's something that this kind of brings out. What we do see is that there are other places in Scripture where this kind of this imagery appears. Okay, and so the prophet Isaiah has a messianic prophecy where it says those who walk in darkness will see a great light, right? And so connecting that with the Messiah, is an important thing. You look at the fact that God often reveals himself in a way that is very bright, filled with light. Saul on the road to Damascus, the transfiguration, the face of Moses. All of these were things that showed divine light. And, of course, in a sense, it's like illumination. And so without light, everything is in darkness. But God often reveals himself in a way that is very bright and noticeable. The burning bush, right? Again, Exodus chapter 3, which is, in my opinion, one of the most important chapters in all the Bible. We might think it's basically anything in the New Testament, but really it's Exodus chapter 3 is super important, as well as other places, Isaiah 52 and 53 with the messianic kind of preview of Jesus and his death. All kinds of places like that. Exodus 3 ranks right up there near the top with some of these other extremely important passages in Scripture. We can see that early Christian writers had kind of a similar view. God reveals himself, shows himself, not just in bright, shining light and a voice from heaven, but in other ways, right? Through the light of Scripture. Scripture illuminates our experience when we read it. That's why it's so important to be deeply involved in daily Bible reading, because it's not just some, requirement that we have to do. It's something that is educational, right? It reveals more. When we read it and study it and take it in, it reveals more about our Creator and about His creation, which includes us, right? So there are important spiritual benefits to reading Scripture. You have the fact that there were early writers who would talk about the light of God being revealed through nature, right? And so Romans 1 is a good place for this, where God reveals Himself. The Apostle Paul about how you can look at nature and get some sense of who God is just by looking at His creation, and that is fitting, because we look at maybe an artist, for instance, and you can get a sense of that artist's values, of his or her perspective on life, or even the way things are framed or the way things are depicted. You can sense something of their of their ideas and values based on the subjects they choose to to present through their work, right? And God is kind of the same way. We look at creation and can see something of who he is in creation. This is what Paul is saying, Romans 1, 18 to 20, 21. And so when we look at even creation itself, right, what's the very first thing God creates? Light. In Genesis chapter 1, everything is formless and void. God says, or commands, literally, be light, right? And we say it in English, let there be light. It has more of a ring to it, and it sounds a little bit more polite. But really, it is a divine command. Be light is what it literally says in the Hebrew. And so it's the first of God's creative activities is to create light. Well, the one who follows Jesus, to kind of swing this back around to the New Testament and to Jesus and to the New Testament documents, is the person who follows Jesus will not walk in darkness. And of course, throughout Scripture, you have darkness being kind of synonymous with ignorance, right? Even today, we have kind of similar metaphors or phrases that we use. We ask somebody, we're at a athletic event, and maybe the one of the referees really blows a call, makes a bad call. Are you blind? Right? And so I used to play on a church softball team, and this one guy on our team, passions run hot on the softball field, as you might imagine. Because most of the guys out there, sort of think of themselves as maybe just a step below professional athletes, right? And so this guy would always, if there was a bad call, this one guy on our team would always ask the referees if he needed cataract surgery, right? And so that was his thing, And but we still use that imagery, right? We still use that for not perceiving, for being ignorant, for missing something that should be obvious, right? And so that kind of thing is something we still use, and the Bible uses it that way, in much the same way. And so the follower of Christ, though, will not walk in darkness, and that means not physical darkness, but moral darkness, right? Because there is a sense in which all of us are imperfect, and without the light of Scripture, all of us are going to be guilty of deeds that are sinful, right? Sinful things. And so we have to, in a sense, see the light, to kind of use a kind of an old revival sort of term there. But there's a story here, and I'm sure it played out many times when Jesus healed the blind, that it's fascinating that the first person a lot of these people saw, they didn't see the Son, they saw Jesus, right? When they were healed, they saw Jesus. In a sense, that's almost like a type of each one of us, because when we come to a knowledge of the truth, the first thing that we really see, and see clearly for the very first time, is Jesus, right? We understand who he is and what he means to all of us, and what he means to our lives as we lead it, as we live it out in this world. So that's essentially what our goal is to see everything properly, because otherwise, what do? You stumble around in the dark. You bang your shin into something, you step on a Lego, right? Which is, like torture. But that's essentially what people in the world do when they do not have Christ, is they stumble around. And, it's just like in the dark, when you're in an unfamiliar place and it's dark. Let's say maybe you go on vacation, right? You're in your hotel room or your condominium or wherever it is, or your house or wherever it is you're staying. You're unfamiliar with the layout, And so maybe you stub your toe on something, or maybe you run your shin into a table, right? You stumble around. Now, eventually you'll get to where you want to go, right? It's just the journey's really hard. And it would be so much more easy. It would so much easier if you could just turn the light on, right? And I think that's kind of an example or an illustration of people in our world. There's a lot of people in our world who stumble around, right? And I guess eventually they sort of make it to their destination. But man, wouldn't it be so much easier if they could just turn the light on, right? And so I've got to, instead of maybe following the commands of Scripture, I'm someone who, sort of stumbles through relationships. I don't treat partners in relationships very well, or I do inappropriate things with them, or, I don't know how to treat people. Maybe exercising some patience and some charity would go a long way to helping that, right? Smooth some of the rough edges or the disagreements in relationships that I have. There's all kinds of things that we could talk about where, the gospel and God's instructions for living would be a massive benefit to us, or to everyone in this world. But those who don't have it sort of stumble around. And maybe they finally do stumble their way through things. But man, wouldn't it have been easier to just have God's instructions, right? He made this world. He made us. It would be so much easier to just follow His plan for things. And so this is something that Christ does. Right? Christ does for us. We see the light of the gospel, right? We see what we need to do in order to be saved. But we've also got so many practical benefits of how to live out this life the best that we can, as efficiently as we can, as smoothly as we can. There's so many things, so many benefits that Christ provides. So, all right. Well, Jesus is the light of the world, and He's the light for us too. So, as always, if you guys will be in worship this morning, we'll love to see you. Or if you'll be in worship soon, we'll be glad to see you when you get back. And if not, if you're just going to be participating through the live stream, we'll be delighted to, we won't see you, but hopefully you'll get to see us, and that way get a sense of belonging, because you are family here at New York Avenue. So, we love you guys, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon.